Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Tir na Nog from Grand Gamers Guild. Tir na Nog is a 1 to 5 player game that plays out across 5 rounds in which players are going to be drafting cards using a open drafting mechanism, which we'll talk about soon, taking those cards and placing them into their own personal rows over here, trying to accomplish the scoring criteria on each of these 3 row cards. That's the basic idea of the game. Gather 15 cards, score them based on the criteria of the cards, see who did the best in the game. Now, to be a bit more specific, each of the cards in the game has a different way they score. This is a good time to tell you that there are a lot of cards in the game, not as many as you might see over here. Let's just focus on a player color. This is how many cards are possible for each player color. You have a bunch of tops, a bunch of middles, a bunch of bottoms. You're going to choose a card in each row, put them out over there, and that's going to give you the different ways and combinations you can have as you try to figure out how to score in the game. If we go ahead and take a look at just one example, and maybe we'll walk through more, maybe not, but we'll start with one. The bottom scoring card over here has a specific way that it scores, and specifically, this wants you to score the longest run of cards in a consecutive ascending order. So for example, if we had a 5, 6, let's say over here, or 1, 5, 6, right now you'd be scoring this 5 and the 6 over here because it's consecutive ascending order. So you can get points for those cards over here. You're trying to score based on the set value. So a set of 1 would be 0 victory points, a set of 5 would be 20 victory points, and you get a bonus 4 victory points if all of the cards are 5 or lower, meaning if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would get you a full 24 victory points for that singular card. That's how you're trying to score that set over there, which means as you go through the game, as you draft cards to the central grid, you're trying to place them into this grid, keeping in mind you're placing them left to right. So putting a 5 over here in your first card over here is really going to leave you in a potentially hard spot. For sure, making it so that you won't be able to get the bonus 4 points along with the consecutive run. You still could get a next consecutive run there. It is going to be harder to do so. So effectively, you're trying to be mindful of the 3 different scoring conditions on the cards. Let's just walk you through the other ones over here. We have the death of Chu Chulan over here. We score 3 or 6 victory points for each card here that is the same color as 1 or 2 other cards of its column. So you're trying to get these sets over here of colors as you go. And over here we have Oni and Oni, where you're going to score the total of the odd cards or the even cards, whichever is lower. So you're going for whatever is lower of the even or odd, so you're trying to strike that balance and get those points. You're trying to balance all of these things as you build out these rows, and the cards are going to intertwine in different ways. Sometimes they'll be more involved in other rows and columns, sometimes they'll be focusing only on their own thing, but you're going to pick those scoring cards, you're going to place them out over here, and then you're going to go through 5 rounds of drafting. Now the drafting mechanism involves this open grid. This grid will be different depending on the player count. Right now it's set up for a 3-player game, and players are going to take the little markers over here and place them in between 2 cards in the grid. So for example, I'm going to place my card, my token over here. That means I'm claiming the ability to take either one of these once we get to the selection process. Another player might go ahead and they also want that 6 over here. Maybe they go over here. They can possibly get that 6 as well. And then we have this player taking over this spot, locking in 2 cards. I'm just going to put a bunch of these tokens out quickly on various spots over here just so you can get a sense of how this is going to play out as we go. So right now we place this all out over here and you have your various tokens on the cards. So once you're done placing all your tokens, you're going to have the players selecting cards one at a time, being mindful that right now when green player is looking over here, they might want one of these 2 cards. Maybe they even want this card. This could be good for them. Maybe they want this card, but if they want this card, they have to make sure to get it quickly before orange takes it first. Because if green takes this card, orange can go ahead and take this card because they have a claim to it. And right now, if green took this card, they would remove the token. Orange would take this card, removing that token. And then that leaves green with these 2 cards, which means whenever you have 2 tokens touching a card, you want to be mindful of what you think the priority is and what you think they're going to take so you can go ahead and lock in your choice first. So effectively, it's a drafting mechanism where you're going to place out your tokens, reserving the ability to take cards, and then go through a reverse system of figuring out which cards you need, which means sometimes in the game, you can get into fun little moments where if you go ahead and you have first rights to a card I want, I can challenge that by making sure to put my token on a card that I know you want, forcing you to consider which thing you have to fight or choose for first. Because if you fight for the one I just took, then I can go ahead and go back to where you were. It's an interesting selection process throughout the course of the game. You're going to go ahead and do that 5 times. Every round you're gathering 3 cards, you're placing these 3 cards in the grid until you fill up a full 5 cards in each of the 3 rows. Once you do so, you're going to go ahead and score points based on the cards themselves, as well as based on area majority of the various colors. You're going to be scoring for connecting groups of colors. So over here, if you have a group of colors over here, that's going to be 3 yellow in this grid. You want to score the largest connected group of each colors, which will give you bonus points as well. That's basically how you play Tir na Nog. The other things to really talk about before we dive into the review is going to be that most of the cards, or many of the cards I should say, are going to just be a number. So over here, we have a blue 3, plain and simple. But many cards will give you other abilities over here. So for example, this card, doing scoring, you may change this card to a 5. So yes, it's an 8, but it can become a 5, giving you some more flexibility and or abilities. Whenever you see text down here on the bottom, that's going to reference an ability that can come into play, so you want to be mindful of that. And whenever you see this over here, here, that means it can modify the number. Because sometimes in the game you can go ahead and modify values either higher or lower, or sometimes even changing the color of a card. When you put tokens on cards, you'll change the color of the card, which can help you for a variety of things, from the cards themselves, from the endgame scoring. Alternatively, sometimes you're able to modify the number of a card, and that's something else you can be doing, going ahead and now this card, which started off as a green 8, is now a 5 yellow. So you're adjusting the numbers, you're adjusting the colors, and those will give you different abilities you're playing through throughout the course of the game. That is how you play Turn on Ugg, which means it's a good time to dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. Rulebook is very straightforward in this one. It's not an overly complicated game. If you've played any game that has point scoring aspects going on, as far as different ways to combine different things, to be mindful of the physical placement of the cards in the grid, that's basically all this game is. You have a drafting mechanism and then a scoring mechanism. The drafting mechanism is a little different than games I've seen before, but not overly complicated. Rather than simply open drafting a card, you're reserving the right to place for it and then having a system of pulling it back, which does give you some room for creative play in there. But then also you have this point scoring area where you're trying to be mindful of the top, middle, and bottom cards you have in play, how they're going to score, and simply trying to get points for those. Once you understand those two concepts, it's a fairly straightforward game. Games come in anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes, depending on player count. A 2-player game with players who know the game, you can probably knock this out in 20 minutes, honestly. Versus if you're playing the full 5-player complement with new players, it might even creep up to an hour, but I'd say usually you're going to be able to close this one out in the 45-minute or less range. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which is the general grid scoring going on in the game. This grid scoring is the core puzzle. The idea of how to maximize this grid, being mindful of the cards available, drafting the cards you want, being mindful of the other players and the cards they want, being mindful of how they place their tokens to get in your way, how you can counterplay that to go ahead and place tokens, driving them to pick something else that they need, and letting you get away with the card you want. All of that's going to combine to give you a game that gives you a variety of things to consider, but you have to figure out what the best combination of those things are that are going to score you points. The variety of the game is a big part for me. The fact that the game gives you a ton of different cards means every game is a different puzzle. There is a recommended starting a complement of cards, and I do recommend going ahead and start with that. They're a little more straightforward, a little more to the point. They'll give you a good idea of how both how cards score on their own, but also how they sometimes weave across levels, which tend to be my favorite scoring cards. When you're looking at a card like the Death of Chulan over here, and you look at the way you focus on cards, not just on its own row, but other things on the board too. I appreciate those cards, and the starting cards will give you a good complement of things, but then from there just dive into any combination of cards that you want. So the variety of scoring is going to give you a lot of fun to reapproach the game every single time. The fact that you're all playing the same game, I didn't really mention this, I should have cover this, but when you start the game, you're going to have one player choosing the top, middle, and bottom, and then every player is going to mirror that. So every player is playing with the same cards in play. So you're all playing with the same grid of cards available. You're all playing with the same way of trying to score. The only thing that will change is who's first player every single round. So that gives you some degree of, random luck thrown into the mix. But past that, you are trying to make the same out of the same ingredients and the same end destination. Knowing that you're fighting for other players gives you that extra degree of, do you go for cards that might be heavily sought after? Getting that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this bottom row can be a good strong start, but if everyone's vying for those, will there be enough, or are you better off just leaving those cards for right now and focusing on the things that the other current players aren't doing right now? And so that balance, that trade-off is present as well. The abilities you have on the cards is going to be another thing, which gives you just enough stuff to mix it up. Most of the cards don't have abilities, which there is a part of me that wishes all the cards had abilities, but the accessibility of the game would tank if you do that. It would be constantly reading every single card, as opposed to right now, there's just enough abilities to give you that interesting little flavor of these cards are doing something else going on, and do you want those abilities? How will they help you? But not so overwhelming as to give you that initial, hey, you're starting the game and you have to learn these 3, but you also have to learn 12 different abilities over here, or depending on the player count, and so that gives you one more thing. And then lastly, I'll say that the solo mode is fun as well. When playing this game for the first time, I just played it solo to go ahead and get a sense or feel for it, and it's not something I always do, especially in games that have a more of a competitive nature to it, but I did enjoy the solo mode. Thought it was fairly straightforward. It has a little card somewhere that it gives you a little solo AI going on. In any case, as far as things I can see others not liking, first of all, the course, as far as what I don't like, in the game, while I really appreciate the point scoring mechanisms going on here, I will say this puzzle gives you a little bit of stuff to manage. I think I would have almost just preferred a straight drafting. This puzzle does give you, I would say the thing I like about this puzzle is specifically that one thing I touched upon already, where sometimes I see you going for a card I'm going for, and I know you have first dibs, and the only way for me to challenge that is to put my piece somewhere that I know you want, hoping you take that instead. That's really the only time that I let this system over here feel clever, as opposed to just feeling like a convoluted way of drafting cards. Straight open drafting would have been basically the same thing, lacking that one area where sometimes you have a bit of a choice, but also I don't know how much it would have cost it. And I think a full-on straight draft might have been a more compelling aspect, literally just drafting. And obviously, I mean, it's a simple enough game that you could just do something like that on your own. It is an interesting mechanism. I don't know if it added enough to the game past the desire to feel different. Again, there are those occasional moments where you can feel clever by forcing a player into a bad choice, but for the most part, I would say that it felt different, but not necessarily better different, just different. You also have the aspect of the game where the cards that come out of the game can affect what you're doing. As you build your puzzle, you start off with an open palette. You can do what you want, and it is up to you to try to figure out how to optimize your game. But as you come into a close, you will have that player who needs that one blue card, and blue cards aren't coming out. You'll have that player who's trying to close off with the final 5 over here, and they did get their 5. And so you have that random luck you'll have in these games, where both players have built towards an endpoint, and whether or not they get the cards that complement that endpoint, again, throughout the course of the game, you're generally trying to make the most of what you have, but the final turn, ultimately some players might get something, some players might not, so there is that small luck element at play. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, the game is completely themeless. While I like I personally like the overall art direction and this slightly, I think Celtic, I'm Scottish Celtic, I'm not entirely sure. I like the vibe of the game, but as far as the art and theme that's kind of there, the theme has no real implementation to the actual gameplay. Don't get me wrong, these all have a nice little story thing going on behind it, which is nice, so if you want that kind of lore to the game, there's definitely lore, but you're just gathering cards and trying to place them for their numbers or their colors. There's no thematic implementation here. I'll say that in the game, as much as I appreciate those times with somebody, the one thing I do appreciate about this grid is how it can sometimes force a decision. Other times you'll have players who placed all the tokens out in a way that the cards underneath them are just taken away, and they're left with wandering little meeples over here. Which the game does have a mechanism. You don't lose something, you are able to take a card later if that happens, but having your cards stolen out from under you, especially when you're playing multiple players, if you're playing a 4 or 5 player game, and your cards are the ones that are constantly getting stolen, that can be harder. To that end, I do think this game is slightly better at lower player counts. I think 3 is probably my sweet spot, but 4 honestly is still pretty quick playing, and is overall still a good experience. 2 is a little bit more back and forth, and I mentioned the solo mode already is pretty decent. As far as final thoughts on Tir na nog, I really like this game. This game has a core thing that I tend to like in games, which is give me a puzzle of different ways that things score, and then let me try to figure out the best way to optimize that scoring. And the variableness of the game also keeps the game alive game to game. The fact that you have these little puzzles, you are trying to play around these puzzles, you can switch out any single card over here. If you switch out that middle card, it totally changes the entire thing that you're doing. It doesn't just change its own row, it changes everything, because the balance of the numbers and the values you're going for and how they all interconnect, that balance is going to totally change when you change up the cards. So it's not just a single card having one small detail. The card distribution and the card economy and the card variety, the way those combine is going to totally change up the way you approach the game. Combine that with which abilities come out earlier or later, or even which colors come out, it is going to force you to re-examine the same puzzle every single time, and I like games that do that. The short playtime, the amount of gameplay you get in that playtime, the ease of teach, the ease of accessibility, the variety of player counts, the variety of gameplay, and overall just the point scoring optimization has this as one that I definitely have enjoyed. It's a 4 out of 5 for me. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you want something that is thematically in the same universe, I highly recommend checking out Inish. Totally different game, but if you just like the art style and you're like, what other games can have that slightly Celtic thing going on over there, definitely check out Inish. And if you're looking for a game that has another game that's going to have a bunch of cards all trying to put the cards into a grid together to score as many points as possible, while being mindful of scoring restrictions or things that will try to focus on how you score, check out Keystone North America from Rose Gauntlet Entertainment. Very different puzzle going on there, but has that definite vibes of point scoring and card tableau being laid out. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.